The markets are closed, but the business stories are just heating up. Hello, I'm Raine Musñgi. Catch up with us on Business Brief. Impeached Vice President Sara Duterte is due to arrive in Manila from Hong Kong. Our correspondent Hannah T is at NAIA and she joins us live for that story. Hannah, go ahead.
Heightened security measures are now in place here at Terminal 1 of NAIA. This is after the arrest of former President Rodrigo Duterte at Terminal 3 earlier this morning. And we are expecting Vice President Sara Duterte to land at 3:45 p.m. today on a Philippine Airlines flight PR319 from Hong Kong. Her arrival comes just hours after the arrest of her father, who is now in Bilyonaryo Air Base. As what I've told you earlier, a heavy presence of law enforcement can be seen, including some PNP personnel. And we haven't seen any supporters of Vice President Sara Duterte yet, but we are expecting that she is going to release or say a statement regarding the arrest of his father. Actually, last Sunday, Raine, Vice President Sara Duterte was with the former president in an event, an OFW gathering or Thanksgiving event in Hong Kong, where she said that she is expressing gratitude for the support, and she even hinted a potential presidential run in 2028. She also claimed in that event that the current administration had abandoned the office of the vice president, and in response to that, Malacanang disputed her assertions and even said that it was her who left the government. And as we await her arrival, we are expecting some supporters to gather outside, but so far we haven't seen any VP Sara supporter yet. And again, we are eager to hear any statement from Vice President Sara Duterte. Raine?
Certainly looking forward to those statements as well. Hannah T reporting live from NAIA. Thank you so much for that report. Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has been arrested by Philippine authorities upon his arrival in Manila today, acting on an arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court, or ICC. The Presidential Communications Office says Interpol Manila received the official copy of the warrant earlier this Tuesday. Prosecutor General then served the ICC notification upon Duterte's arrival at NAIA at past 9 a.m. from Hong Kong. After NAIA, the former chief executive was brought to the Bilyonaryo Air Base, and he's expected to be brought to the Camp Crame Custodial Center. The PCO says Duterte has been examined by government doctors and is in good health, but the former president says he has not been informed of the charges for which he is being detained.
What is the law and what is the crime that I committed? To me now, the legal basis for my being here, as apparently I was brought here not of my own volition. It's somebody else's. Kung hindi ibang tao, ikaw siguro, because this is your structure. So you have to answer now for the deprivation of liberty.
The ICC has accused former President Duterte of crimes against humanity, specifically related to the thousands of deaths resulting from his administration's aggressive anti-drug campaign. Human rights organizations have alleged that many of these deaths were extrajudicial killings, a claim that Duterte's administration has consistently denied. Duterte's arrest marks a significant moment in the country's political landscape. Philippine shares fell over 2%, the worst performer in Asia for the day, but traders say it's from worries of an economic downturn in the U.S. and a correction from the recent rally of the PSEI. For former Chief Presidential Legal Counsel Salvador Panelo, former President Duterte's arrest was unlawful, as the PNP did not allow one of his lawyers to meet him at the airport and to question the legal basis for the arrest. Panelo adds the former president was deprived of legal representation at the time of his arrest. Panelo also insists the arrest was illegal because the ICC no longer has jurisdiction over the Philippines and the arresting officers can be held criminally liable. Panelo believes the arrest is politically motivated and related to the 2028 presidential elections. An ICC lawyer believes former President Duterte should stand trial for his crimes against humanity. He says former President Duterte's arrest was, or rather, Attorney Nery Colmenares, the accredited counsel of the ICC and a counsel for some of the families of the victims of extrajudicial killings under Duterte, told the Bilyonaryo news channel that Duterte may be held in one of 3 locations after his arrest, then charged at The Hague. He can be held in detention at the ICC custody or with a third party, such as an arrangement with the Philippine government, or at The Hague itself. Whatever the case, the arrest warrant is valid, legal, and constitutional, and can be executed in the Philippines since the country was a signatory to the Rome Statute, and the investigation of Duterte started before the Philippines' withdrawal from the ICC could become effective. Once brought to The Hague, charges could be filed against Duterte, a trial court convened, so it does not mean he is already convicted. Colmenares hopes the families of the victims will be heard at court.
He can question it before here, but if he's already there in the ICC, it's best that he questions it there in the ICC because it has jurisdiction over him. Depends on where he is, but he has all the options to do that, both here and in the ICC itself. The procedures allow him to question it.
Former Senator Laila de Lima hailed the arrest of former President Duterte. She said it was the beginning of a much-needed reckoning for an abuse of power. After having been jailed for over 7 years over alleged drug charges, de Lima said this arrest should signal a restoration of human rights. Rights lawyer Shel Diokno also welcomed the Duterte arrest and called for him to be put under the ICC's jurisdiction immediately and wished for his conviction. He also warned that the fight is still ahead and sought protection from the government for the witnesses and the victims' families. Well, Asian stocks took their cue from Wall Street and fell sharply on Tuesday as worries mounted that a wide-ranging trade war could dent U.S. economic growth and result in a recession. It was a sea of red in Asia, with Japanese shares slipping more than 2%, with the Nikkei 225 briefly dropping below 36,000, touching its lowest since September, before paring losses. Chinese stocks, which have been on a tear this year, were not immune to the downbeat mood. The Shanghai Composite opened lower by almost 8%, while Hong Kong's benchmark Hang Seng Index opened lower by over 2%. In South Korea, the Kospi shed 2.21% at the start. Skittish investors flocked to the safe haven Japanese yen. Their concerns about the potential economic slowdown were exacerbated after U.S. President Donald Trump, in a Fox News interview, talked about a period of transition while declining to predict whether his tariffs would result in a U.S. recession. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskiy met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ahead of talks between Ukrainian and U.S. officials that Washington hopes will deliver substantial progress toward ending Russia's war with Ukraine. The Saudi state news agency SPA reported early Tuesday during the meeting in Jeddah, the Crown Prince underscored the kingdom's support for international efforts to resolve Ukraine's crisis and achieve peace. Saudi has played a mediating role since Russia's invasion, including brokering prisoner exchanges and hosting last month's talks between Moscow and Washington. Talks on Tuesday between the U.S. and Ukrainian officials are the first official session since Zelenskiy's abortive White House meeting, and Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff said he had high hopes. The head of Ukrainian steel giant Metinvest says rebuilding its heavily war-damaged operations will hinge on U.S. and European security guarantees in any ceasefire deal with Russia. Metinvest chief executive told Reuters the company planned to keep its production close to 2024 levels and push ahead with projects to increase its energy independence. He said that means security guarantees now need to be robust. Otherwise, investors are unlikely to lend Metinvest the money it needs to rebuild. Metinvest was forced to close Ukraine's only coking coal mine in January as the front line of the war moved to within roughly 2 kilometers of the mine.
Because we believed in Minsk agreements, because we believed in the ceasefire, in the peace deal, we were investing in Mariupol. We were investing billions in Mariupol and were prepared to invest even more. But then it all got destroyed in a matter of few months. And then none of the agreements were obeyed. Our Ukrainian assets are still the anchor assets that we have for the operations of the company. So naturally, we are looking at the countries which have short logistics to back home. We will try to have an improvement on the steel production, iron ore production, but that improvement is going to be within like 3-5% improvement on last year. We don't expect anything more until the peace is restored. We need to see what sort of conditions will be agreed to for a ceasefire or for a peace deal, and what sort of guarantees will be provided so that business can start investing again.
Metinvest produced around 14 million tons of steel before Russia's 2022 full-scale invasion, when the iron and steel sector contributed around 10% of Ukraine's gross domestic product. An expert believes a collision between a tanker carrying jet fuel and a cargo vessel in the North Sea was caused by incompetence. A U.S. military spokesperson told Reuters the U.S.-flagged Stena Immaculate tanker was on a short-term charter to the U.S. Navy's Military Sealift Command when it was struck on Monday, while anchored off northeast England. The tanker was ablaze and leaking off northeast England, and more than 30 crew were brought to hospital. One remains missing. The tanker is one of 10 in a U.S. government program designed to supply the armed forces with fuel when required.
It is unusual that this accident happened because the Stena vessel full of aviation fuel was at anchor, and the Portuguese vessel, the Salman, basically powered into her. Now, there were reports of fog earlier, but modern ships have anti-collision systems, they have radar and so on. The Stena ship could have done very little about it. It couldn't have moved away because it was at anchor.
On the lighter side, Bank Indonesia has exercised an unusual strategy during the Ramadan season to avoid price pressures in a country with a history of runaway inflation. BI officials have enlisted clerics to preach against overconsumption during this holy period. In a remote town on Indonesia's West Java, Muslim clerics gathered for a sermon led by central bank officials on the importance of managing inflation. Ramadan ends with the Eid al-Fitr festival, which, like in many other Muslim countries, typically marks the peak demand in Indonesia. Islamic clerics are considered highly influential in Indonesia's remote areas and towns such as Majalengka, located about 3 hours from the capital, Jakarta.
What the clerics usually do is how to educate the people by teaching and sermon. Fasting does not mean increasing consumption. That's what we can do. And of course it plays a very important role in educating the public. More or less, it might also help the government to maintain these things like inflation. Usually, the outcome from the forum with Bank Indonesia is that we can give understanding to our students about inflation. And inflation is like blood pressure, not too high and not too low, and we should be in the middle. In the Islamic school, we called it Khairul Umuri Azathuha, which means it is best to stand in the middle of every problem. According to our guidance in Islam, overconsumption is forbidden, whether in buying clothes or food. And with this forum we will provide literacy and education on giving a better understanding of spending money wisely to help stabilize prices.
BI has also been running unconventional programs such as bringing experts to teach farmers better agriculture practices, running a podcast on spending management, and getting religious leaders across the country to address inflation. Indonesia's inflation in 2024 was 1.57%, near the lower end of BI's target range, while West Java's rate was 1.64%. Inflation rate has dropped further in the first 2 months of 2025 due to a large increase in subsidies for electricity prices, while economists predicted inflation will remain within BI's 1.5 to 3.5% target range this year. We have to pause for a few reminders. The biggest business stories from around the country and the market's closing data are up next. Keep it here on Business Brief, only on the Bilyonaryo News channel. Welcome back to Business Brief. Ayala Land is betting big on the growth of its hospitality business. Details from our correspondent Sujin Kim, who joins us on the line. Sujin, go ahead.
Yes, Raine. Ayala Land Hospitality is embarking on an ambitious expansion strategy with a $500 million capital expenditure aimed at nearly doubling its hotel portfolio to 8,000 rooms by 2030. This as the country continues to attract high-value travelers, with visitors spending 50% more per capita than in Thailand. The domestic tourism market, which contributes 90% of the industry's revenue, is also fueling demand for more diverse accommodations. To address accessibility concerns, Ayala Land is leveraging alternative international gateways through Clark and Mactan Cebu airports, while supporting the privatization of NAIA. The company will finance the $500 million expansion through a mix of debt and equity, leveraging its high-margin profitability. Investors are now eyeing Ayala's hospitality business as a key growth driver, with the potential to boost estate revenues alongside tourism growth. And those are latest updates from Makati City. Back to you, Raine.
Thanks so much for that report, Sujin Kim. Foreign direct investment, or FDI, net inflows into the Philippines plunged to $110 million in December, marking the lowest level in 11 years. Data from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas shows this is a sharp 85.2% drop from the $743 million recorded in December 2023. This also makes it the weakest FDI inflow since December 2013, when it stood at $102.16 million. The BSP attributes the decline to higher debt repayments by Philippine corporations to their foreign investors, which limited new inflows. The Philippine agricultural trade gap narrows to $1 billion in January, a sign of stronger export performance in the sector. Data from the Philippine Statistics Authority shows this is nearly 3% lower than the $1.3 billion deficit recorded in January last year. The improvement comes as agricultural export revenues surged by almost 33% to $715.25 million. It's higher than the $538 million in January 2024. Philippine shares and 6 days of gains, taking a dive almost 2.5% and falling back to the 6,200 level. That's after falling as much as 3%. The main index paired losses to finish Tuesday at 62.06, the worst performer in the region. But traders say it was because of uncertainties surrounding the U.S. economy and not local political developments. Decliners swamped advancers threefold, 157 to 58, while value turnover reached 7.7 billion pesos. The properties and services counters led the slide, with Ayala Land and Razon's port operator ICTSI dragging the most actives list. Ayala led Bank of the Philippine Islands was the lone advancer among the actives, ending in the green after posting consolidated net income of 20% last year. Meanwhile, at the foreign exchange market, the peso is currently trading at 57.42 to the greenback, slightly weaker, or rather slightly stronger than yesterday's close of 57.41. And that's a wrap of today's Business Brief. I'm Raine Musñgi. Join us again tomorrow as we bring you the stories that help you plan your next big, bold moves in business, only here on the Bilyonaryo News Channel, always on time.